Damaged EGR valve. Symptoms, causes, and what happens if you keep driving. Has your car lost power? Is it struggling to accelerate? Is it emitting black smoke from the exhaust? Or is the check engine light on? Then be careful, because one of the parts that could be causing problems is the EGR valve. And here's something important. Many people hear damaged EGR and automatically think it needs replacing. But that's not always the case. In some instances, the problem is simply accumulated dirt. In others, we're talking about a real malfunction. In this video, I'm going to explain the symptoms of a damaged EGR valve, the most common causes, how to tell if it's actually broken or just dirty, and, above all, what happens if you keep driving like this. Because it's one thing for the car to still be running, and quite another for it to be a good idea to keep driving it without checking it. So let's get down to business. What is the EGR valve, and why does its failure affect things so much? Before talking about symptoms, it's important to understand what this part does. The EGR valve, or exhaust gas recirculation valve, is responsible for returning a portion of the exhaust gases to the engine to reduce combustion temperature and help control pollutant emissions. Simply put, it's a key component of the emissions control system. The problem is that it operates in a complex environment, with dirty gases, debris, and soot. Over time, this dirt can cause the valve to become stuck, remain open when it shouldn't, stay closed, or simply stop working properly. When this happens, not only do emissions increase, but engine performance also begins to suffer. And that's when the symptoms that many drivers notice almost immediately appear. Symptoms of a damaged EGR valve. One of the most common symptoms is the check engine light illuminating. If the vehicle's computer detects that the EGR valve isn't working correctly, it stores an error code and activates the warning light on the dashboard. But this isn't the only symptom. You might also notice loss of power, unstable idle, hesitating when accelerating, poor engine response, black smoke from the exhaust, increased emissions, and even misfires. In my experience, when the EGR valve is stuck open or closed at the wrong time, the air-fuel mixture is disrupted. This results in an engine that no longer runs smoothly. Sometimes the car feels sluggish. Other times it vibrates excessively at idle. And in more obvious cases, it accelerates poorly, misfires, or the malfunction indicator light comes on. If black smoke also appears, you have a pretty clear sign that something is wrong with the combustion process. Most common causes of a faulty EGR valve. The most frequent cause is usually carbon buildup. Over time, residue accumulates inside the valve and can prevent it from opening or closing correctly. And when the EGR valve becomes clogged, the system stops working as it should. But it's not all dirt. It can also fail due to solenoid wear, electronic failures, vacuum system problems, cracked or loose hoses, or even faulty connections. That's why it's best not to jump to conclusions too quickly. An EGR valve can be dirty, but it can also be seriously damaged. And the way to fix it isn't the same. How to tell if the EGR valve is damaged or just dirty? Here's one of the most important questions. Because an EGR valve clogged with carbon buildup is one thing, but a truly broken EGR valve is quite another. I don't recommend replacing parts without checking them first. The first step is to do a visual inspection. If you remove the valve and find obvious buildup of residue, carbon deposits, or dirt blocking the mechanism, you already have a pretty good clue. The second step is to use an OBD2 scanner. If the ECU has detected a problem with the EGR valve, it will usually have stored an error code. This helps confirm if you're on the right track. It's also a good idea to check the rest of the system. If your vehicle uses vacuum to control the valve, also check the hoses, connections, and any possible leaks. Because sometimes the problem isn't just with the valve itself, but with what actuates it. In short, if the part is dirty, cleaning it might fix it. If it still malfunctions after cleaning, then it's very likely that it's damaged or that there's another associated problem. What happens if you keep driving with a damaged EGR valve? This is a question many people genuinely have. Can you continue driving with a damaged EGR valve? The real answer is, sometimes yes, but it's not a good idea to ignore it. The car might still be running, but that doesn't mean it's working properly. If the EGR valve fails and you continue driving the car like that, you could experience reduced performance, increased fuel consumption, higher emissions, misfires, increasingly pronounced jerking, and more erratic engine operation. In some cases, if the valve remains closed and significantly alters combustion, it can also increase the engine temperature and cause more serious problems. And if there are also misfires, we're no longer just talking about inconvenience. The catalytic converter could also be at risk. My recommendation is simple. If the car shows even mild symptoms, get it diagnosed as soon as possible. But if you notice strong jerking, excessive smoke, a clear engine misfire, or a flashing malfunction indicator light, don't ignore it. That's not something to put off. How to fix a damaged EGR valve? The solution depends on the source of the problem. If the valve is dirty but not damaged, a careful cleaning can often resolve the issue. In that case, the process would be: remove the valve, check for accumulated debris, clean with a specific product, verify that the mechanism moves correctly again, reinstall, clear codes if necessary, and perform a test drive. But if the problem persists after cleaning, then you need to consider other possibilities. The solenoid, the electronic components, the vacuum system, or the valve itself could be faulty. And in that case, the EGR valve will usually need to be replaced. In that case, in addition to installing a compatible, high-quality part, it's also advisable to check the ducts, hoses, and the rest of the system to ensure the failure isn't accompanied by another blockage or additional problem. Common mistake: thinking that every faulty EGR valve needs replacing. This mistake is very common. Some people replace the valve too soon. and some people try to clean a part that's already clearly damaged. The key is not to proceed blindly. First, look at the symptoms. Then, visually inspect the valve. Next, scan it with an automotive scanner. And from there, decide if the problem can be solved with cleaning or if replacement is necessary. That's the most logical way to save time, money, and headaches. We'll answer some frequently asked questions. What are the symptoms of a damaged EGR valve? The most common are loss of power, unstable idling, jerking when accelerating, black smoke, increased emissions, misfires, and the check engine light illuminating. Is it safe to drive with a damaged EGR valve? Sometimes it works, but it's not advisable to leave it untreated for too long. The car might still run, but the problem could worsen and further affect performance, fuel consumption, and even other components. How can you tell if the EGR valve is damaged or just dirty? The best way is to combine a visual inspection, reading codes with an OBD2 scanner, and checking the vacuum system or electronic control unit. If the problem persists after cleaning, it was probably more than just dirt. Can a damaged EGR valve cause black smoke? Yes, it can contribute to poor combustion and increased emissions, especially if it disrupts exhaust gas recirculation and the engine stops running properly. Should you clean or replace the EGR valve? If it's dirty, cleaning might work. If it's damaged, has an internal fault, or the problem continues after cleaning, it's usually best to replace it. So in summary, if your car has a loss of power, an unstable idle, black smoke, or the check engine light is on, the EGR valve is one of the parts you should check as soon as possible. Sometimes the problem is dirt. Sometimes it's a real breakdown. The key is not to guess. First diagnose, then clean if it makes sense, and if that doesn't work, replace. Because continuing to drive with a damaged EGR valve might seem like a temporary solution, but it often ends up costing more. Without further ado, I hope this video has been useful to you and you can solve your problem. See you in a next video. Bye-bye.